The method made use of in England, as stated by Sir Edward Coke, of making statutes in their parliaments, according to Poyning's law, of which hereafter, is this: 1. The Lord Lieutenant and Council of Ireland must certify to the King under the Great Seal of Ireland the acts proposed to be passed. 2. The King and Council of England are to consider, approve, alter, or reject the said acts, and certify them back again under the Great Seal of England. And then, 3. They are to be proposed, received, or rejected in the Parliament of Ireland. By this means nothing was left to the Parliament of England, but a bare negative, or power of rejecting, not of proposing any law. But the usage now is, that bills are often framed in either House of Parliament under the denomination of heads for a bill or bills, and in that shape they are offered to the consideration of the Lord Lieutenant and Privy Council, who then reject them at pleasure, without transmitting them to England. But the Irish nation, being excluded from the benefit of the English statutes, were deprived of many good and profitable laws, made for the improvement of the common law, and the measure of justice in both kingdoms becoming thereby no longer uniform. Therefore, in the 10th year of Henry VII, a set of statutes passed in Ireland, Sir Edward Poynings being then Lord Deputy, whence it is called Poynings' Law, by which it was, among other things, enacted, that all acts of Parliament before made in England should be of force within the realm of Ireland. But, by the same rule that no laws made in England between King John's time and Poynings' law were then binding in Ireland, it follows that no acts of the English Parliament made since the 10th year of Henry VII do now bind the people of Ireland, unless specially named or included under general words. And on the other hand, it is equally clear that where Ireland is particularly named, or is included under general words, they are bound by such acts of Parliament. For this follows from the very nature and constitution of a dependent state, dependence being very little else but an obligation to conform to the will or law of that superior person or state, upon which the inferior depends. The original and true ground of this superiority is the right of conquest, a right allowed by the law of nations, if not by that of nature, and founded upon a compact either expressly or tacitly made between the conqueror and the conquered, that if they will acknowledge the victor for their master, he will treat them for the future as subject, and not as enemies. But this state of dependence being almost forgotten, and ready to be disputed by the Irish nation, it became necessary some years ago to declare how that matter really stood, and therefore, by the Statute 6 George I, Chapter 5, it is declared that the Kingdom of Ireland ought to be subordinate to, and dependent upon, the imperial crown of Great Britain, as being inseparably united thereto, and that the King's Majesty, with the consent of the Lords and Commons of Great Britain in Parliament, has power to make laws to bind the people of Ireland. Thus we see how extensively the laws of Ireland communicate with those of England, and indeed such communication is highly necessary, as the ultimate resort from the courts of justice in England is, as in Wales, to those in England, a writ of error, in the nature of an appeal, lying from the King's Bench in Ireland to the King's Bench in England, as the appeal from all other courts in England lies immediately to the House of Lords here, it being expressly declared by the same statute 6 George I, Chapter 5, that the peers of Ireland have no jurisdiction to affirm or reverse any judgments or decrees whatsoever. This propriety, and even necessity, in all inferior dominions of this constitution, that, though justice be in general administered by courts of their own, yet that the appeal in the last resort ought to be to the courts of the superior state, is founded upon these two reasons. 1. Because otherwise the law, appointed or permitted to such inferior dominion, might be insensibly changed within itself, without the assent of the superior. 2. Because otherwise judgments might be given to the disadvantage or diminution of the superiority, or to make the dependence to be only of the person of the king, and not of the crown of England. With regard to the other adjacent islands, which are subject to the crowns of Great Britain, some of them, as the Isle of Wight, of Portland, of Thanet, etc., are comprised within some neighbouring county, and are therefore to be looked upon as annexed to the mother island, and part of the kingdom of England. But there are others which require a more particular consideration. And first, the Isle of Man is a distinct territory from England, and is not governed by our laws, neither doth any act of Parliament extend to it, unless it be particularly named therein, and then an act of Parliament is binding there. It was formerly a subordinate feudatory kingdom, subject to the kings of Norway, then to King John and Henry III of England, afterwards to the kings of Scotland, and then again to the crown of England, and at length we find King Henry IV claiming the island by right of conquest, and disposing of it to the Earl of Northumberland, upon whose attainder it was granted, by the name of the Lordship of Man, to Sir John de Stanley, by letters patent, 7 Henry IV. In his lineal descendants it continued for 8 generations, till the death of Ferdinando, Earl of Derby, A.D. 1594, when a controversy arose concerning the inheritance thereof, between his daughters and William, his surviving brother, upon which, and a doubt that was started concerning the validity of the original patent, the island was seized into the Queen's hands, and afterwards various grants were made of it by King James I, all which being expired or surrendered, it was granted afresh in 7 James I to William Earl of Derby, and the heirs male of his body, with remainder to his heirs general, which grant was the next year confirmed by Act of Parliament, with a restraint of the power of alienation by the said Earl and his issue male. On the death of James, Earl of Derby, A.D. 1735, the male line of Earl William failing, the Duke of Atholl succeeded to the island as heir general by a female branch. In the meantime, though the title of king has long been disused, the Earls of Derby, as Lords of Man, had remained a sort of royal authority therein, by assenting or dissenting to laws, and exercising an appellate jurisdiction. Yet, though no English writ or process from the courts of Westminster was of any authority in Man, an appeal lay from a decree of the Lord of the Island to the King of Great Britain in council. But the distinct jurisdiction of this little subordinate royalty being found inconvenient for the purposes of public justice and for the revenue, it affording a convenient asylum for debtors, outlaws, and smugglers, authority was given to the Treasury by Statute 12, George I, Chapter 28, to purchase the interest of the then proprietors for the use of the Crown.